This talk is the fourth in the series to be presented by our esteemed guest speaker today, Sri Dr. Supal Singh, IIM Ahmedabad. We have had three share their takeaways from illustrious careers in rural development. Indeed, it's an honor to have you, sir, today on our Expert Speak series, which is a precursor to ideating on the theme of a planned documentary film, Sankalpam, to be directed by the acclaimed filmmaker duo Sri Ajay Kanchan and Sri Mahesh Bhatt. Dr. Supal Singh is a professor and former chairperson, Center for Management in Agriculture, Indian Institute of Management, IIM, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Former Director General, Center for Research in Rural and Industrial Development, Chandigarh, and former professor and head, Agricultural Economic Research Unit, Institute of Economic Growth, New Delhi. He has been conferred the title of Fellow of the Indian Society of Agricultural Economics for his contributions to the discipline as well as the society in 2018. He is founding co-editor, Millennial Asia, an international journal of Asian studies. He has 12 books, the latest being Institutional Innovations in the Delivery of Farm Services in India, and more than 150 research papers in international, national journals, books, besides 70 articles in newspapers and magazines. He is on the boards of many non-profits working in the agri and rural space. He was a visiting fellow at the IDS, Sussex, the UK, Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, Thailand, the University of Manchester, the UK, and the Copenhagen Business School, Denmark, and a member of various committees, working groups of the Planning Commission of India, Niti Aayog, the National Development Council, the Food Safety Standards Authority of India, which is FSSAI, and the EC of the Mission on the Integrated Development of Horticulture. He was a member of the Standing Working Group on Agri and Allied Sectors of Chhattisgarh State Planning Commission and the Committee for FPO Policy for Punjab and Committee on MSP and the other mechanism for farmers in Chhattisgarh. He has been a visiting professor at Center for Development Studies, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, and at Punjab University, Patiala, Punjab, both during 2018 to 19. He has delivered the following memorial lectures: S. Balbir Singh Memorial Lecture, Professor Parthasarathi Memorial Lecture, Professor Surjit Singh Memorial Lecture, Professor V.S. Vyas Memorial Lecture, etc. His research interests lie in small producer and worker livelihoods and collectivization of such stakeholders in the context of agribusiness value chains and deregulation of agricultural markets in India and the developing world. I now request our NGO co-founder, Mr. Suresh, to briefly introduce the aim of the series. Thank you.
Thank you, Manasa. Honored to have Dr. Supal Singh ji today in our lecture. And the point was, he was very kind enough when I sent him a request and he agreed to actually participate in this expert series session. We planned this particular session as well as the series, basically trying to learn ourselves about exactly the mission that we have set out for ourselves. The point is, we have basically conceived of doing a documentary film. Sankalpam is the name, as in Sanskrit, it means that resolution, the determination to do something. So the Sankalpam here is, the documentary film will try to address the root cause of the problem of rural distress and rural migration. And it'll try to highlight the solutions that are available to us at this point of time. And no better than Mr. Supal Singh, Mr. Sudhir Goyal, and all these experts in the series who have worked in the trenches for about 30 years, 40 years, who walk the talk. They would be the best voices for who we want to give the megaphone through the film, so that the film basically primary audience, we want the primary audience for this film to be the academies of India. Each city has about 400, 500 colleges today, and we have millions and millions of students. A documentary film which captures the reality can be a very, very powerful tool in the hands of real experts. And they would be able to sensitize these students about what is happening in the rural areas, how these youth can contribute to the success of many rural enterprises by turning into entrepreneurs, agripreneurs, etc. And we are looking forward to the inspiration from all these experts to be made into a film form that can be presented to the youth of this country and dedicated to the youth of this country. So on that note, not taking much of your time, I would like to hand over to Dr. Sukhpal Singh, sir. Thank you. It's an honor to have you, sir.
Thank you, Sureshji and Manasa, for very detailed introduction. Let me say I'm very happy and proud to be part of this group. What I have today to share with you and learn amongst this very august group is what I have been sort of asked to do, that is to look at the collective space, which is also very close to my heart. So I am going to talk about this topic of farmer producer companies. So Dhirji is there, who is very much involved in this. But my association with this concept and its practice goes back to 1994. So I can say, in fact, I have grown with this concept and its practice in my academic career, because that's where I started my first sort of academic assignment at IRMA. And that time in 1994, we had the very first workshop, brainstorming workshop on what was known as cooperative companies. So they have NDDB and Dr. Kurian were very keen to look at alternatives to traditional cooperative structure, which were not delivering goods except a few places and few commodities or products. And I have been at it since then, in terms of not only understanding the concept and its similar kind of practice elsewhere across the globe, because there are others who have tried this kind of model earlier in different forms, but also going to the field and trying to document, understand, and analyze what is going on in terms of the promotion and practice of this idea, which is farmer producer companies, FPCs. I am not calling them FPOs because to me that makes it too broad. And then one can talk everything under the sun under that concept in farmer organization, but then you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm focusing on farmer producer companies because that is a departure from the past and from the previous set of instruments we had to achieve development for the rural and the agricultural sector. So I would only talk about farmer producer company structure, though there are half a dozen different ways in India to set up farmer collectives. Best available legal form we have in India now. We have tried many other things. And I believe that this model or this legal structure can deliver the goods in the new agribusiness environment which is around us. So this is a best suited platform for small producers to come together and do their business for improving their well-being and livelihoods. Therefore, I have been sort of interested in this ever since 1994, and I have carried out two studies, field-based studies, one in 2010-11, which was very initial phase at that time, and which was published in 2014, and one I just completed. So earlier one had 24 case studies from 4 states, and the one I have completed now has 35 case studies from 5 states, mostly producer companies. I have been trying to look, earlier I looked at the performance of these entities per se, whether they're able to be on their own or not. But in this study, because now we have come a long way in terms of the not only the act, but also the policy thrust on this, I've also looked at the impact they're able to make or not able to make on the shareholder members and other stakeholders. So if you just want to trace quickly the importance of this, I think we all know that we are in a market economy. If you have to make farmers or producers improve their incomes, then you have to link them up with markets. Everybody talks about it. And it's very difficult to link farmers with markets if they do not have a platform of their own. We can talk of alternative channels which do connect farmers to market. Let me also say that markets are not something which farmers don't know about. Farmers are connected to markets for all the times and all the places. But the issue is that the way they are connected or linked to this market, it's not very paying for the farmers. Either those markets are not functioning efficiently, or when farmers participate in these markets, they don't get a reasonable share of their hard work from those markets. And many times they end up losing actually. So it's more about bringing an effective market linkage for small farmers rather than saying we are just linking farmers to markets, improving farmers' market interface rather than saying that we are taking them to market. Okay, so it's important to talk about effective market linkage, which can make an impact in helping the farmer earn more, because our farmers are marginal or small. I don't need to spend too much time on this. If you look at the latest NSSO survey of 2018-19 also, it shows that almost 90% farms are less than 2 hectares, and half of that may be dry land, non-irrigated land. The other big issue when we talk about small farmers market interface is this interlocking of markets, where farmers do not have cash to buy in those markets when they need to buy, or they don't have income flows. So they end up borrowing in cash or kind, whether it's seeds or fertilizers or pesticides or any other agri equipment. So when they are into that kind of borrowed purchase of these inputs or services, they have this promise of going back and selling to the same seller of credit or seller of those farm inputs. That's called interlocking or interlinking of two markets which do not function independent of each other. In that kind of interlocking, where a farmer borrows and then supposed to bring back his or her produce to that buyer or seller, then you don't get a sort of good price, both in terms of buying at good price the farm inputs, which are good quality. I'm saying this because in India, there is evidence that 25 to 30% of the chemical pesticide market is made up of spurious products. There are also issues in the seed market, not so much in fertilizers. So one, that you end up buying maybe at higher price, lower quality material, which compromises on your economics of farming. On the other side, when you go to sell to that entity which has helped you produce by giving you credit or kind inputs or services, then you end up maybe realizing lower price, because you have no choice of channels to sell elsewhere. You are bound to sell there. So this is also many times holding back farmers from getting adequate benefits from their farming effort, which they make for 6 months, 3 months, or 1 year. Earlier, I pointed out this fact that we have had large-scale traditional cooperative structure failure in this country, with few exceptions from states like Gujarat and Maharashtra in milk and sugar. But by and large, traditional cooperative structure has not delivered, for the fact that it was not independent of external influences. And that was the reason that the concept of a cooperative company, rather than a cooperative in every sense of the term, was thought of and designed into an act in 2002, which became operational from 2003. This idea of producer companies or cooperative companies as hybrid structures, because they have elements of both cooperative and a company, is based on the new generation cooperatives, experience elsewhere in the developed countries, whether US or Canada or parts of even Pacific, where they allowed freedom to their traditional cooperative to convert with the changing economic environment, to convert into more business-like entities. So that is what feeds into the kind of act we have, saying that if we want these entities to perform, then we should not load them with too many objectives and also should not interfere in their governance and management. Yeah. So the superiority of the PC structure or producer company structure as a legal entity over other types of FPOs is that it's completely free from any external control. Nobody, I say this with a lot of, nobody other than the primary producer can become member of this entity, and nobody other than the primary producer can be on the board of this entity. So it's totally composed of stakeholder farmers. So the ownership as well as control of the entity is with the farmers and their representatives and nobody else. And as we know, what matters is ownership and control of an entity in terms of how well it can perform. So that's why I'm convinced that this is the type of legal structure which is very relevant for India, and we should make the maximum use of this. I'm just highlighting these differences between a traditional cooperative and a producer company. I'm sure you know it by now because we had. Okay, so what I was saying was that it's a cooperative company. It's a hybrid structure. So there are elements of cooperation which are retained. For example, one member, one vote. And others, even if you take them on the board, they have no voting rights. Yeah. But there are other things which are different in terms of shareholding, in terms of whether shares can be traded, the profit sharing and role of government and things like that. So it's a very, very free structure compared to other legal forms. And it's much more, I call, business oriented as against other entities. If you compare it with private limited and public limited company, there also it's slightly different, but it comes close to, and it has many things which these two entities don't have. It's treated as a limited company, private limited company. Every producer company has to write in its name that so and so producer company limited. So that is where it is the hybrid structure. It is as much under the control of registrar of companies as any private or public limited company. And that is the only sort of monitoring authority or agency which can ask questions. Nobody else has anything to do with. We are already into it in a big way for the last, now I should say, 18 years. There's a very gradual movement in the first few years where people didn't understand the concept. But by 2019, we had more than 7,000 such producer companies. Yeah, FPOs may be many more, but producer companies. And they had 4.3 million members. Of course, average membership was low, ranging around 500 to 600 members, depending on who is the promoter. I will also share a slide with you showing what all or who all are into this domain. The concern I have is whatever we have done so far is that if you look at the average shareholding of member, it is just 2,000 rupees. Yeah, and it's much lower in parastatal or statal body promoted PCs because their focus is more on small and marginal farmers. To me, this is a worry, because if you don't create enough stakes of farmers, what I call in their own company, then you have a problem to begin with. Whatever external support you may get, whatever external resources may come in, if the members, owners do not put enough money, then you can't be getting ahead in terms of making better financial performance as well as making an impact on the membership and larger community. So as you can see, the spurt happened during the last 3 years of 2016 to 19, where more than 3,000 out of these 7,000 came in because government bought this idea around 2013-14. The government of India and many state governments came in saying, yeah, this is what we should be doing. And surprisingly, even NDDV, which was the body promoting milk cooperatives all the decades since 1960s changed track and said, now we want to promote milk producers companies. Today, NDDB has 6 milk producers companies, which are state level in 6 different states of India. And they're doing very well, And as you can see, it is again, as happens in India, because India is a very diverse country. Things don't happen at the same pace in all places. So some states have taken a lead and others are only thinking about it now. Yeah. For example, Maharashtra it leads in it, about 2,000 farmer producer company, maybe many more now. Dr. Goyal is with us, he can update later on this. UP, which was a surprise for us, but UP was never ahead in any of these kind of innovative institution building. It has 750 last count. Then Tamil Nadu, which is also a new state. MP, which was an old state, started the first in India with World Bank project in 2005, has fallen back now. And there are over 200 all women member PCs, which are again mostly in these states, Maharashtra, MP, and Odisha. So we have very diverse domain in terms of what is happening where and what does it constitute in terms of membership, paid up capital, authorized capital. Yeah, the issue is that because of those small amounts of share capital, we have paid up capital, which is only about 10, 11 lakhs on an average. And 86% of these producer companies are with less than 10 lakh paid up capital. Yeah, and most of them are more recent origin, less than 5-year-old. So that is where I think the first hurdle comes in, that when you don't have enough of your own capital, you can't mobilize more capital from outside. Major promoters, I mentioned SFAC, which is from Ministry of Agriculture, Special Purpose Vehicle, NABARD, which has been interested in this, Maharashtra Agricultural Competitiveness Project. Many corporate foundations, many NGOs have taken upon themselves to take this entity forward in terms of organizing farmers around it. So I will talk about in the next slide the models of promotion. It is only in dairy and coconut business, because these are promoted by two boards, Dairy Board and Coconut Development Board, that you have very high paid up capital. So top 20 companies belong to these 2 sectors, which are I call high value sectors. And one in grapes, which everybody talks about today, Saidari, which has 8,000 members. So this is the kind of scenario which prevails. I will maybe come back to this question later before we get stuck with these, but these are the different models. Yeah, you have SFAC model, which talks about minimum 500 members and certain percentage of small and marginalized communities being members in that certain proportion, then only you become eligible for certain grants. A NABARD model, there's an MACP model, there is an NGO model, there's a corporate foundation like Reliance into a big way. Ambuja Cement Foundation is also involved in a significant way. Then the NDDB model, we talk about Coconut Development Board and others. Some of the farmer unions and farmer federations are also doing it on their own. So it's a very vibrant space today, because people have realized that if you want to do some business, agri-business, then you have to have adequate freedom. And this structure provides you not only freedom, but you can also get some public support, funding and other hand-holding support if you organize farmers around this. If you look at the performance, before we come to the challenges and best practices, this is from the latest study I have carried out across 5 states. It is still a bit saddening that even after 3, 5, 7 years of being there, these entities have not been able to reach the levels of authorized capital they had started with. Yeah. So in UP, it varied from 32% to 100%. But authorized capital itself was small, 5 to 15 lakhs. Yeah. They were all able to manage to make some minimal profits. Only one was in loss. And we'll also come to why they were able to do so. Rajasthan again, like when I'm saying, I'm quoting these states, we also looked at different promoters to assess the relevance of their model of promotion and what does it mean for the performance of the entity as well as the impact it can make. So in Rajasthan, which was in fact worst case scenario for us, they were between 20 and 73%, half were at 20 to 30%. And the authorized capital was even lower, only 5 to 10 lakhs. Yeah. And many of them had not yet started off doing any significant business other than dealing with a few inputs. MP, which is a well-entrenched state in terms of PC promotion, again, was not doing very well on, but there's large variation because some entities are very old and very large, like SPS promoted Ram Rahim, that is the largest, very large capital as well as very robust performance. West Bengal, which again a new state in some sense, was doing much better. Only one was lacking. Others were mostly there in terms of authorized capital, which was also significant, being as high as 25 lakh in a couple of cases. And they were able to do well because of certain state support they got. And same was the case in Tamil Nadu. These two states have very significant policies for farmer producer companies. I will highlight that a little later. And then we talked to National Dairy Services, NDDB's, this company which has promoted these. These were, of course, class apart because of the scale and the promotional sort of skills and capabilities and capacities of NDDB being there. So they have authorized capital, which was into the range of 30 to 50 crores each. We studied 2 out of the 5. And so if you look at the overall picture, about only 7, which is 20% of the total, had mobilized 100%. Almost half had more than 75, but these were more in Tamil Nadu. Yeah, and some of them were all women PCs. Very, very important to take note of that. And others were not really there. Impact, it's important because if you're talking about this kind of entity and entity for the purpose of promoting rural businesses and rural economy and therefore making rural people better off, then we need to look at some of these things which are issues which are wide ranging in terms of being everywhere, but they are still important at every level. Inclusiveness. If you're really talking about helping small and marginal farmers, because that is what I look at all the time, then I think here we should be happy to note that they were made up of small and marginal farmers, but the profile of the small and marginal farmers who were members was that they were larger than their non-member counterparts. So even within small and marginal constituency, there is certain kind of prioritization which happens. Yeah, so I'm not saying that they exclude small farmers, but there is more one can do there. I'm not saying every member, every small and marginal producer should be made a member. No. In fact, it's a laughing matter that sometimes people take this entity or this kind of organization of farmers into this kind of entity as something which is cure for all ills. Like I narrate one story which happened in one of the meetings I was part of. The person got up and said, okay, so we want to promote FVCs. So how many small and marginal farmers are there? He said 9 crore. Then he said, okay, yeah, as per our norm, each FPC should have 1,000 members. Therefore, we need 90,000 PCs. I said, no, please excuse us. We don't want every farmer to be member of it, and we don't want 90,000 PCs in this country. If they don't work, it's no use having numbers. If we can get 20 to 30,000 PCs going effectively, then they can set things right for other farmers who are not even members, because other channels will start behaving. So I think we need to take a note of what do we mean by role of such entities. It's not that every member, every farmer has to be a member of it. It's that they have to play a role where they become significant players in these markets, each market, wherever they operate, and they're able to set the rules of the game for other market players. The second is gender. I think except in Tamil Nadu and to some extent in MP and Rajasthan, there were hardly any women members among PCs. Wherever there were PCs which were not exclusively women, it was all men, by and large. So I think if we are talking about now feminization of agriculture in terms of farm work being generally carried out by women farmers or workers, and only 10% women having land ownership in this country, which may also not be under their control, and therefore incomes coming from them. I think we need to take this call that if women have to increasingly play a larger role in agriculture sector, then how do we make it more gender inclusive? Yeah. Member awareness. This is the biggest worry for me, that if we are creating farmers companies, then somewhere we are missing the bus or not boarding it as much as we should do with proper seating, because our survey showed that only 62% of the members knew the name of the producer company they were members of. Yeah. And non-members 44% knew. So it's not, so I think when we are talking about a member, owner, farmer of a PC, then I think we need to do more. Then we need to do more spade work before we set up the company. 27% member didn't know it at all. And other 11% reported it wrong. And only 27% knew that PC was owned by themselves. Yeah. And they even reported that this PC or producer company is owned by employees of the company or the board of directors. 18 and 8%. I think these are worrying trends that the people are not even aware where they have paid a few hundred rupees or few thousand rupees to become member. And we say these are farmers companies. If that awareness is not there, then we can't expect better governance and we can't expect better patronage by the members, better use of the services of the 31% member didn't know who owned the PC. Yeah. And some in Tamil Nadu, other states other than Tamil Nadu also thought it was owned by government. So I think this is a worrying trend that then we may be falling back on some of these promises we are looking at if we are not able to do enough extension of the not only concept and its practice, but also that farmer has to own this. So far as governance is concerned, only 50% members attended the PC meetings regularly, and others only sometime or occasionally. So that reflects that if you don't even know that it is yours, you will not go for meetings regularly. Now, these are the profile of member versus now these are member versus non-member and state-wise. So you can see numbers are not very large. It's in 5 acres, 6 acres. Yeah. Rajasthan, of course, you had larger 8 acres and 10 acres. But by and large, you're looking at states like West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, even Tamil Nadu. These are really small holder entities. And overall averages are 4.5 owned land and 5.34 operated land of the members, which is slightly larger than non-members, but still we are there. We are there that we are talking only about small farmers and small and marginal farmers. Yeah, this is the gender composition. Yeah, there the things are really that only 18% members overall were female. Women, and it was significant in some states like Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan, because there's a couple of milk PCs which are largely composed of or significantly composed of women members. If you look at impact in terms of tangible farm incomes and so on, I think the farmers members were excited about being members. And they wanted others also to become members, or they said we'll encourage others to become members. But what came across was that it was more of a transactional relationship rather than transformational. That they were there seeking a few benefits from these companies, whether lower price inputs or better availability of farm inputs or some better price realization for their produce. But the output linkage still remained poor across most states. Yeah, a lot of these PCs, to begin with, they think input business is easier. and much more in demand by farmers to improve their yields and reduce their costs and so on. That is fine. But to me, if you are not able to attend to the market side of it, in terms of what will farmer do with lower cost produced, better yield production, then the story is only half complete, or maybe it will be completely lost. Because the farmer is not able, if the farmer is not able to sell well, then all this has very little meaning. So we have to prioritize the market interface improvement. In fact, there are many PCs in states like Rajasthan which had not done any output linkage even after being there for 3 to 5 years. The only thing they were trying to do was to get MSP for farmers, which is not bad, but then this is not all about market linkage. Yeah, farmers also wanted better and more effective output linkage, and they thought that was what would make their lives better. But it's not that nobody's trying. There were PCs in West Bengal we came across, even Uttar Pradesh, which were engaging in contract farming with private agencies, whether in potatoes or drumsticks or other crops, high value crops, because that was important, because these crops do not have MSP. So farmer has no price protection at all. But this was very small part of the members they were able to get, or maybe few dozen in most cases. They were not able to go beyond that for a couple of places, a few hundred farmers, because contracting companies also choose farmers very carefully. They don't work with everybody and anybody. So those kind of, now if you look at this departure from the others, which is NDDB's model, I think we need to learn a lot from there, despite the differences in scale. One, that they do business with members only. Many other PCs also serve non-members. And these companies believe, the NDDB's milk companies have written in their document that we will do business only with members, because that is our priority, so that you encourage others to become member as well as you benefit, because member-owned, these are member-owned entities, these are not government agencies. The second is that they expect minimum mandatory participation. Members in milk, it's the number of liters of milk every season you deliver. Yeah. So if you don't do that, then you are degraded in terms of, they have categories of membership A, B, and C. If you don't do this kind of patronage, then you're degraded, and then your sort of eligibility to even come onto the board of the milk producer company is reduced. They also expect that those who want to sell more to the PC will also give more money to the PC in terms of equity shares. Yeah, of course, there's no mandatory thing. It's that if you want to really do bigger business, for example, they say ₹1 per liter milk supply, you have to buy that kind of shares because you're trying to get more benefits. Then should also be able to contribute to the capital of the company to help that. They also have staggered terms for the board of directors, where 1/3 retire every year, so that nobody dominates it forever. Yeah, even within the member, we are not saying external dominant, but within the membership also dominance is not allowed. Other very important thing which are not written on the slide is that they don't allow anybody with known political affiliation to be on the board of the milk producer company. So that has kept it away from the local and other politics, and nobody can really use this entity for driving other benefits from being on the board of. So I just go to best practices now quickly, based on these 35 case studies and earlier 24 case studies across states, across promoters and so on. What makes some of the companies perform? I think one is the large member base, yeah, and choice of activity. These two, I think, are very important. You should have, and large member base and choice of activity. That in order to get to the market, you need to have certain volumes. So that requires, I'm not saying every time, but if you're not attending to a niche market, then you need to have volumes to reduce your transaction cost, to attract the large buyers, and to also make an impact on the larger number of farmers, to make it visible entity. The choice of activity is very important, because what happens, we have, like earlier case of cooperatives, many of the promoters are driven by farmers' immediate benefits. or their heart bleeds for farmers. And many times they end up working on the same crops which farmers have been producing traditionally, which actually is not the right activity. If you're talking about a market-oriented entity and market-oriented business, then you have to start with the market and end up with the market by looking at what is going to sell, where it is going to sell, and how do I, rather than saying whatever I'm producing, how do we get a better market for it? So I would say we should prioritize high value commodities or products, or we should have multiple businesses to make it larger in terms of member base, as well as to make it profitable and viable activity. So that is one part that a lot of them are lacking on this. Member engagement also requires multiple activities. For example, if you want to do crop diversification, then you need contract farming, or you need some direct buyer. And in UP, this picture I've shown, the PC brought banana for the first time to the area, all the way from South India. So that is a big departure from the existing cropping pattern, that you could bring a very high value crop to the local area, and that could really make difference to the farmers' incomes. Participation in eNAM, Electronic National Agricultural Market, to have better discovery of the farmer prices, and other channels like MSP-based public procurement. That is a standard thing many PCs look at, but that helps member engagement, because if farmers are able to get MSP, at least they think, yeah, they have got a benefit. Importantly, producer risk reduction, both production risk and market risk, is the crux of the matter, because in India, farmers suffer from very high risk of production. We know that our crop insurance schemes are not working, not going beyond a point. The Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana was a much better scheme compared to the previous avatars of it. But even this could not go beyond 30% of the gross crop area. The target was 50%. And now government has made it optional. Earlier it was tied to the loans farmers used to take from institutional sources. Now it's delinked. And the coverage has already gone down by a few percentage points and will go further down. That is my assessment. So unless we do something about the production risk management, and unless we do something about the market risk reduction, I'm not saying elimination, but risk reduction at least, so that farmers are able to get better incomes at the end of the season or so on. So there are companies, whether in Karnataka or in UP, which are doing this kind of things by contract farming. Contract farming reduces your market risk, if not production risk. So there's this company which is doing sweet potato contract farming for hens. There's another federation of producer companies in Andhra, which is doing tomato production for Sunship for processing. I mentioned the case of UP, where this company is working with Pepsi for contract farming of processing variety potatoes. There are companies in Tamil Nadu which are doing crop and livestock insurance. Now, this is very unconventional. Generally, cooperatives and PCs don't get into that kind of, but they say that is very important. If the enterprise, for example, if farmer is into small ruminants or livestock rearing and there is no insurance, just one calamity for the farmer in terms of a disease or health risk to the animals or the death of animals can wipe out that family's enterprise. So they have proactively brought crop or livestock insurance to their members. And that has made all the difference. Mixed member base in terms of not just saying no to other farmers who are not small and marginal, because they also bring money and bring volumes. And it doesn't mean that they will control the PC, because there's one member, one vote. So that is also an idea which we should not ignore, that if bringing in medium, semi-medium and some large farmer helps the business of the company, then we should be open to that, which by law, there's no restriction on that. But more importantly, value chain mapping based interventions are required, that we should not simply organize and set up a PC because there is a government mandate to do that, or there is some money to do that. We have to see, if you set it up, whether there's a felt need among farmers. If yes, what kind of businesses it should undertake, not the routine activity which other people or other institutions or farmers are doing anyway. So that may not make a very significant and sustainable difference. But what I would sort of repeat is that the initial spade work in member mobilization is generally missing many times, especially now when we have big public money coming in, with government announcing 10,000 more farmer producer organization to be promoted in the next 5 years with almost 5,000 crores of rupees. Then all kinds of players are coming in. And now the way the guidelines and frame, there are this cluster-based business organization, which has brought many large consultants into this domain. I don't know whether that is good for this sector, because if you don't belong to local areas, then you take more it like a project for 3 years, 5 years or whatever, and then after that you disappear. Whereas this kind of entity of farmers requires certain amount of localization of the promoting institution. And many NGOs, which may be slow in bringing up this numbers of FPO or FPCs as well as their size, they belong there. So there is a much more symbiotic relationship. And our earlier study found that FPCs, which were based on water users associations or farmer interest groups or self-help groups, were able to do better, both in terms of operating at a scale as well as sustainability in terms of business viability. There are many other best practices or innovations which are happening in the ground, whether it's about organic produce or natural produce or high value produce, or even NPM, non-pesticidal management of crops. Those things are helping producer companies achieve viability. Storage, warehousing engagement is also much needed, because that can help break this interlocking of farmers with the buyers. Unfortunately, we have this Act, Warehouse Receipts Act, since 2007, but we have not seen much dynamism on that. There are only a few thousand sort of warehouses which are qualified to be giving warehouse receipts. Now, this is very interesting sort of policy or regulation, you can say, because if you don't want to sell the produce, don't want to do the distress sale, then you can keep your produce and get up to 80% of the value of produce as a loan against that produce kept in a warehouse. But not only infrastructure is missing, I think awareness among farmers is also missing. Only few FPCs are making use of it in few places. And there have been some PCs actually which have even done this innovative arrangement with basics, where once the government support for promoting those PCs dried up, they agreed to pay the professional fees for employing these promoters, professional staff. I think that is the way forward, that you can't be looking for external support all the time. You should be able to foot the bill to some extent if you think that external resources are required and they are proving to be useful. Another very interesting innovation has been in Maharashtra, which is about using the law to promote joint ventures and subsidiaries, where the PC has been able to join hands with a private entity to set up a subsidiary to do things, to go to the market, to mobilize more money and more sort of business, which PC can't do. Yeah. So I think that kind of thinking is also required, that when the law allows you to have joint ventures, collaborations, subsidiaries, then we should not shy away from that in terms of joining hands with others to go ahead and set up entities which are much needed. Franchising, which is a relatively new concept in agribusiness, especially at the farmer level in terms of input franchising or output franchising, can also help. Some of the promoters have used it in their operations more as agri startups, but PCs can also look at it to reach larger markets and cut costs. Expert directors in the board, yes, some PCs have them, but not all. I think we need more professional expertise. They may be farmers' entities, but if the farmers are not exposed to the larger environment in which PCs have to operate, then it's important to bring in, because you have a range of 5 to 15 directors on the board of a PC. So you have space for at least 2 expert directors there as per law. And that should be, the pictures I'm showing here are those of warehouses which have been created or provided by the state governments to these agencies. And these pictures show the kind of retail space provided to PCs in West Bengal. They have this Sofal Bungalow supermarket, which state government is running. They have handed over this to on a competitive bidding basis to farmer producer companies. And that has made all the difference to their turnover and their viability. So I think it's this kind of state support which is required, where you have infrastructure which is available, which can be leveraged by the producer companies. Should be the NDDB's model is asset light and low asset turnover model, that they say we don't want to own packing plants or processing plants or chilling centers. They have been trying to control their costs. They have been trying to get it job work basis and all the processing of milk and so on. So I think that is also important. To begin with, you don't need to pump in too much money into fixed assets. You should be able to work with others to do that. And the last point I would make is that you should also look at India's wholesale markets, because these are the still driving forces, whether regulated or non-regulated APMC mandis. If you need to intervene there, now I understand that in some states they have proactively started giving licenses, APMC mandi licenses to producer companies. I think we should ask that more proactively as a policy measure and get a space there to make a difference in terms of how these markets behave and play our market intervention role. I would skip the problems because these are talked last time also. I was hearing that session. Only thing I'll highlight is that the first two or three, that awareness needs to be raised, ownership needs to happen, and member equity needs to be raised in terms of pinching the farmer a little more. Then other things will start falling in place. Government is there in a big way. You can see here, I've listed all that since 2012 letter of Ministry of Agriculture, which said that producer companies should be treated like traditional cooperatives. Yeah, there have been all kind of matching equity grants, all kind of promotional grants, all kind of credit guarantees, the budgetary support to promote, the top being sort of leverage for FPOs, income tax exemption for producer companies. For the first time, it has happened in this country that producer companies, even if they retain profit, they will not need to pay income tax. Even cooperatives didn't have this facility. So this has been given for 5 years. If you have up to 100 crore turnover, those PCs can avail of income tax exemption. Many states have come in, whether Karnataka or Odisha or Kerala or Punjab, whether as part of their agricultural policy or separately, they have FPO policies now. The only concern is that the way government is looking at it, one, I mentioned about this target-oriented approach. When you say that we want 10,000, we want in 5 years, I think that big money coming in can do both good as well as bad, depending on how it is channelized. Because when you want to create institutions, they take time. Yeah, you just can't be doing, it's not digging up a few wells or tube wells or building a few warehouses. It's about organizing people and making them believe that they can have their own business. The doubling of farmer income committee had certain recommendations in its report. It also recommended that maybe 6% of the equity can also come from private sector, but they need not be made members. I am not comfortable with this idea, so I put a question mark. It also recommends a national level farmer development board on the lines of NDDB. I think there's no one type of farmer in this country, and one type of board will not do. When NDDB was set up, it had a different environment of the 60s and 70s. Now we are in a very different environment. So again, I put a question mark there. It also puts the onus of supporting FPOs with the equities for 10 lakhs on the state. So I don't know. So we don't know whether the right hand knows what left hand is doing. This is always a constant battle in this country, whether agriculture belongs to states or center. Now, when this center has been promoting it with all kinds of money since 2014, now suddenly no, states should do it. I think we should leave it to states whether they want to leverage this entity or not. We should not put it as a kind of a mandatory thing on them. It also recommends a domestic feed subsidy for FPOs produced by various means. I think that government has been doing for anyway for a lot of perishable produce. So that is the. I have a few suggestions here. One, I'm saying that in the priority sector lending for farmers, we need to create some targets for FPOs. Because the way priority sector money is being given away now, there are a lot of violations and dilutions which have happened over the last 20, 25 years. The people who need that money the most are not getting it. I can even tell you that the priority sector accounts are being traded among banks. So you don't need to do your quota. You can buy your credits from somebody else. It's like carbon credits. I think this is not done. We should say that not only half of the credit will go to small and marginal farmers, but certain percentage that also go through the FPO route. So that FPOs get a push and FPOs are also able to leverage it for their member farmers. Giving private mandi license to FPCs, I think Maharashtra has done a great job on this. That is the only state which has visible policy and practice on this. We can also hand over something. I talked about Tamil Nadu and West Bengal. I think that is much needed. And state level policy and engagement is needed. Many states are just sitting quiet on this as if center will do everything. After all, these are happening in different states. So states have to take a call on how they want to look at it. Last slide, if I'm allowed to do this. Lessons. I think wide stakeholder consultations are needed. When you want to organize that a producer company, scope and management in terms of choice of business activity, identifying best practices, and ensuring professional management is much needed. Member involvement. There is even possibility of restricting the membership if you have achieved certain level and scale in terms of processing capacity or whatever. Even this is doable, but I don't think any producer company has tried, because one, that many of them have not grown to that scale, but that itself can incentivize people to come in and stay rather than being floating population. Scale and market linkage we talked about, capital mobilization we talked about, mixed member base we talked about, inclusion of small and disadvantaged like women members. Most importantly, promoter withdrawal strategy. Many NGOs stick around for years and years and years around these entities. I think you can give 5 years, 7 years. After that, you leave it to the farmer members and the board to look into their affairs. If they succeed, fine. If they don't, let them wither away. We don't need all the promoted PCs to succeed. We need only a significant chunk of them to make a difference to the farmer incomes and livelihoods. Also, I think when we talked about risk reduction, we should mind that it's perhaps more important to stabilize incomes rather than enhancing incomes or doubling or tripling farmer incomes, because many times farmers just get washed away with the one drought or one flood or one market not happening. So that is very important, that we need to clearly target the member stakeholders in terms of what is that they need the most, and try different options which are available in the law. Thank you. These are the two studies I have put: producer companies in India, organized for the 2014 study, and the latest report which will be brought into a book in a few months, understanding performance impact of producer companies, case studies across states and promoters in India. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now the session will be open for Q&A session. Let us start with Mr. Suresh. He would like to ask you something.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Dr. Sukhpalji. It was a wonderful, enlightening session. Distilled wisdom of a few decades was on display there. And the interventions that you spoke about, with clinical precision, those areas you have identified very well. No wonder that your studies, which you authored several books in the past, has come a long way. I have an issue with my video today. I'm extremely sorry about it. Perhaps the next session should be all right. I had just one small slide that I would like to show and ask you a specific question. Can I start my screen, Mansa?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Is my screen visible now or no?
No.
Okay.
Yes, we can see now.
Yeah. So here is the basic idea for the film which we have proposed. We want to create a common delivery platform. I was listening to you, sir, and with other experts also. They they have been heaping praise on the model that you spoke about, and I believe you have contributed as well for the development of the model, the FPC, Farmer Producer Corporation or Company.
Companies. Yeah.
So, company, sorry. The legal structure has been identified as the best possible model, a socio-economic model or a social enterprise. No two ways about it. It's been prized by many of your ilk, people from across different cross sections, including academia, including people, including politicians, including bureaucrats, everybody. And there have been people who have reaped the benefits for having formed these kinds of collectives as FPCs. And all of you, especially today, when you are highlighting many of the factors which come in the way of success of these projects, all of you are talking about intervention, not just an intervention, a multi-dimensional intervention. And this precisely is what we have to address. And we thought we make a documentary film which can promote a CDP, Common Delivery Platform. It has to be at the village level. It has to be at the panchayat level or whatever. This is the first step for making things accessible to villagers, to the illiterate Janta living in the villages. So we have had a few discussions previously. Sri Elango is a thespian who's creating model villages, which was showcased in Paris show. It was approved by world leaders and considered as one of the top 10 best models for a village for the farmers and for the rural communities in general. So he's setting up some village academies in Tamil Nadu. 2 pilot projects would be coming very shortly, one near Madurai and one in Trichy. So this village academy is a good place. It becomes a platform for what we are thinking. We are still in the conceptual stage, and we want experts like you, Dr. Sudhir Kumar Goel and others, to talk about this. So we want to make this academy or this platform or a sort of a single window system to hand over all the information that the people need, the villagers need. It was very enlightening, your discussion that only a small percentage of people know that they are in a FPC. They think it is a government-based organization. Some people don't even know the name. It's really an eye-opener for many of us here. So we have to create this CDP, which will be manned by 1 or 2 people who are committed. And the information regarding all the schemes available. Take, for example, the FPC itself. It should be explained to the villagers in a language they understand, the local language, whether it is Marathi, whether it is Tamil, whether it is Hindi, whatever. That information, the awareness is the primary thing, what an FPO is or what a social enterprise is. So that information delivery can happen on these kinds of academies. We can try 2 pilot projects and then expand it, replicate it across the country. So number 1 is the information. Number 2 is facilitation. There are 3 different aspects that can be given through this CDP. One is to create awareness about what is available to them. There are so many projects, there are so many schemes, so many funds, so many grants, so many equity guarantees. But the thing is, the villagers hardly know that such schemes exist. So number 1 is awareness, which is the information. Number 2 is hand-holding or facilitation. We'll let those people who man these academies or these CDPs, the common delivery platforms, to help the villagers to even fill up any application that needs to be done. Handhold them in filling up the applications, in supporting documents, and trying to follow up what has happened to their appeal or application and so on and so forth till the very end, till they can establish their so-called FPO. Today, as you're all aware, it just takes a matter of 2 hours for you to register a company. It's all online today. If you have all the documents, a chartered accountant can get you your FPO certificate in a matter of few hours. That is not at all the issue, as Dr. Sukhpalji was saying. The issue is whether they will survive, they'll continue to be sustainable, continue to be successful, and organically grow and become forces on their own in the rural area landscape. So that requires the most important thing, which is education. There is hardly any education which has been given to the farmers about all these aspects. Business planning, whether it is financial literacy, whether it is legal literacy, business skills, marketing, branding. So there has to be a powerful nationwide distribution of information which can empower. In other words, which can educate. It's a very tall order. It's a Himalayan kind of a Herculean task that we're talking about. But then, as we are talking, some experts have come forward to offer their training modules. We are trying to connect with some training company, which is the chief mentor being Mr. Arun Subramaniam, who was a CEO in multiple companies, was about 40 years in corporate governance. He is prepared to offer with this set of trainers. He has globally established his training programs with several US universities. Many of the Ivy Leagues are also, they are affiliated with him. So he wants to build the training modules. And we are saying that with the inputs that come from experts like you, who are in the trenches, who have walked the talk, who have understood what is the ground reality, what are the ground level problems. If we can all come together, then we can even deliver the training programs in an audio-visual format in local languages. Mr. Durjati was talking to me the other day, Tarkeshwar. I believe they have an application, a mobile app, which can also be used on mobiles and tablets and PCs. He says this application can deliver the training content to the villagers. So the CDP is a center where we can even run these kinds of training programs, either self-paced learning or instructor-led learnings, but that requires manpower. And we are thinking of actually going to the academies, going to colleges. Each city has got about 500, 600,000 colleges. If at least one college adapts one village, one CDP in a village, the youthful energies that are available to us today, the boys and girls going across even on weekends to man those CDPs and delivering the content and doing the facilitation, creating awareness, would change the rural landscape. So we thought we will have this kind of a CDP model where we can hand over information regarding, as the graphic says, the central government schemes, state government schemes, block level schemes, whatever, including public-private. Dr. Sudhir Kumarji was suggesting about public-private kind of a joint venture, and Dr. Sukhpal also mentioned about it in Maharashtra. The CSR funds and grants, the NGO programs that are available, as well as the academy programs. Can we centralize this delivery, make it a single window system model, and distribute it? Because dissemination is the part. And I think at the core of it, we are all talking about one thing, training or education, which can highlight all the problems, which can also highlight all the solutions available and the way forward. So I would want you to just spend a couple of minutes talking about this model, sir. Over to you, sir, Dr. Sukhpalji.
Shall I go ahead?
Please, sir.
Yeah, okay. I think what I feel after seeing this slide and your explanation of it, see this problem of working with rural populations has been there, and it largely comes from the fact that the state is not able to reach there. We keep saying that agriculture extension, for example, in India is long dead. Yeah, it simply it's not there. If you look at any data, very few farmers will report that somebody from the public system came to talk to them about crops or markets or whatever. So that is one part, that you have this role which was supposed to be played by the public agencies is not happening as desirable. The second is, I think this slide also reminds me of the debate which has been going on for many years now, if not decades, over the convergence of schemes, whether at the central government level or state level. So I would say that we are talking about those things in a different form, at a different sort of level in terms of the village level delivery of aid. But I would sort of add to this slide saying, if you're talking like this, you're talking about center, state, and block. Why is district missing? Why is district missing? Because that is been a bigger entity and more important planning sort of entity. We have very significant district level planning. We have district level planning boards and so on. So why are jumping to block from state?
So I stand corrected. I omitted that, and it also shows my ignorance about rural
that's okay.
structures.
I'm just seeing whatever is written here. So that is one part, that if we want to do this kind of awareness raising, training, and capacity building, then we need to identify all the levels. Also, some of these schemes, for example, the NREGA reaches directly from the central government to the village panchayat. But we have not kept the panchayat into the loop here. Panchayat is the most important democratically elected body with a lot of powers now. 29 functions after the 73rd Amendment are handed over to panchayats. Some states have done it, some others have done, others have not done as much. So they can do a lot more, not just implement Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. So panchayat has a very big role here, though it's politically driven in many places, as we have seen in the case of implementation of NREGA also. But panchayat cannot be missed. So that is the.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt, sir?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Sri Elango's Village Academy is called Elango's Panchayat Village Academy, sir. Sorry for that. We will add.
I'm not talking about academy's name. I'm talking about the panchayat as a constitutional body at the village level or group of village level, which is a very important institution. If you're talking about state governments and block and district level bodies, you can't miss the panchayat with whatever limitations it may have. Panchayat as it happens as under the constitution. So that is the fourth tier of democracy, you can say.
Right.
Whatever, or third tier. So that is my take on this. Of course, other things are okay, CSR funds, grant, NGOs, and so on. My concern here is that this model is geared to work more for individual farmers and rural people. If we are talking about collectives like producer companies or any other form of cooperative, they don't happen necessarily at the village level. I mentioned about one type of PCs which are at the state level. There are many others which are at the district level, many others which are at cluster level, many others which are at group of village level. So they may not be able to benefit from this kind of academy because their requirements of their functioning are very different from individual farmer or individual producer. I remind you of the thing I mentioned earlier, that we did this capacity building of 4 or 5 producer companies from Odisha in 2015-16. You won't believe they were into this business of doing business through the producer companies, both on the input and output side. Mostly output side they were. Some were into masala, some were into food processing and selling, some into even medicinal plants, and some into the swai grass and so on. They were doing their business without having any understanding of what business is or should be like. They didn't know how to do pricing. They didn't know how to do distribution, how to do retailing, how to do promotion. And we brought them to IIM Ahmedabad 3 times for 3 days each. Their board of governors, their CEOs, and their marketing managers for 3 days each. And we interacted with them in Hindi. But they didn't know English, we didn't know Odia. So, and the kind of issues which came up there in terms of they simply not know, they're all well-meaning people, heading different NGOs, working with different development agencies, but they had no idea how a business is run or should be run. So that is a very different game, whether in terms of market orientation or business plans or strategy and so on. They had no business plans. We gave them business plans after working with them for 1.5 years. We gave them 3 to 5 year business plans under that project. So what I'm saying is that the requirements of a collective or a rural enterprise are very different from that of a primary producer or a farmer at the village level. So I don't know whether this academy can attend to that kind of requirements of not only awareness generating, but also training and capacity building and hand holding. As you said that the role should be awareness and facilitation. So their facilitation requires a different level of effort and different level of scale. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we are open to other members who would like to ask questions if they have any. Thank you.
Can you stop sharing now, or you want to keep it like that? Yeah.
No, sir. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hello, this is my question. I'm Umanat Naik.
Yes,
It was a nice presentation, sir. One question I have is there a good database now of all the farmers and their categorization, or is it a work in progress? So, I mean, once you have all these schemes and all these subsidies, you should ensure that it goes to the right target group. So how good is the database regarding all these farmers?
Very good question. And you asked a very difficult question as well. The government agencies themselves don't know how many farmers are there in this country. If you look at NSSO, it has one figure. If you look at census, it's another figure. If you look at another source, NABARD, it has another figure. So we don't even know definitely how many farmers are there. The numbers vary from anywhere between 9 or 10 crore to 14 crores. Not only that, so that is one level of confusion. That's why you would appreciate that when the government launches PM Kisan in 2019, it gives this money, 6,000 rupees per year, only to those who are land owners. They may be cultivators, they may be non-cultivators. So to us in India, farmers still in official circles mean only land owners, not any cultivator who may be leasing in, who may be sharecropping in, who may be doing some other arrangement with the owner. They simply are outside the net of any government scheme or policy. In fact, I should not be hesitating to say that this country has no agriculture policy and most of the states have no agriculture policy. So we are running this sector, very vast sector, which has more than 40% people directly dependent, and it contributes significant chunk of GDP. We are running this with only schemes, but no policy. Policy is more about direction and orientation you want to give to the sector. That is not there, unfortunately. So that is one part. Second part is that if you look at the Swaminathan Commission report, which was in 2007, they define a farmer in India as anybody who is engaged in farming or allied activity. So for them, even landless agricultural workers are farmers. But we don't. We treat them only as an input in the production process. We don't look at them as stakeholders. In fact, I make a larger statement that whenever we talk of Indian agriculture or crisis in Indian agriculture, we mostly talk about crops. Then we started talking about farmers. It's only now, after this government came to power, that we are talking about farmer incomes. Earlier, we never talked about farmer incomes. We only talked about how much we are producing and of what kind. And only now we are moving to what we are producing in terms of food safety. Earlier, we were only in the mode of producing more and more, whether it was edible or not, nobody cared. So then when we talk about farmers, we generally talk about small farmers. Yeah, we don't go beyond that. But to me, the real heroes and sheroes of Indian agriculture are the workers, mostly landless or very, very sub-marginal category workers who do a lot of wage work. If you look at India's data, now latest data from NSSO 2018-19, of an average farmer's monthly or annual household income, as much as 40% comes from wage work. And there are people in this country, scholars, who are arguing that why don't we redefine farming? Why do you want to take all these 9 or 14 crore people as farmers? You should look at who is cultivating and getting at least 50% or more of that household's income from farming. Only those households should be called farmers. And that number then comes down to 3.36 crore, or only 39% of total farming households as defined by NSSO. So we don't even know who is our target of policy or interventions. We are doing all kinds of discussions and debates because we simply don't know enough about the sector and the farmers and their issues. Yeah.
So can I just
I don't
request
know whether
Dr.
I have answered your
Sudhir
question, but this is what I had to say. No definite answers.
Thank you, sir. I mean, I get the point. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Dr. Sudhirji, can we kindly have a few words from you, sir?
Sir, I would request that let us have wisdom from Professor Sukhpal Singh. It's very difficult to get him for such kind of a very informative discussion. I can speak some other time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else, please? No, your audio is not clear, Shubham.
Audio.
Shubham?
Shubham.
Hello.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. Is the audio better now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying, sir, like in the past 3-4 years, I have developed the interest towards agriculture, and I have been doing a lot of studying here and there. So I also started studying about what are the different kind of agricultural institutes and what is their role in helping the agriculture sector as such. So which includes the students and professors, the teaching faculty. So I just wanted to know, sir, how are the agricultural students and the agricultural faculty involved with the farmers or the farming community?
Okay. It depends on at what level you talk. For example, if you talk of places like our CMA, Center for Management and Agriculture, which is directly funded by the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India since 1970s. We don't work with farmers. Our job is to inform policy. We do policy studies. Though we go to farmers to learn from them, to get information from them. We don't do any farmer level intervention in terms of making farmers aware or giving extension or whatever. So that is one level of people who are involved in this domain in terms of research and learning or dissemination. So we directly provide inputs to government policy based on our understanding through research. The second level of institutions are like MANES or NIAM, which are apex institutions of the Government of India. They train a lot of students in the specific domains of extension and agricultural marketing. Yeah. So they also directly don't go to farmers. There are then central agricultural universities and institutes and state level agricultural universities and institutes. They are directly interfacing with farmers, both for their research as well as taking back their research to farmers in terms of the adoption of those technologies or practices or whatever. And in each state now there is a SMETI also, State Management and Extension Training Institute, whatever. Yeah, Agricultural Management Extension Training Institute. So there are hundreds of institutions because, as you know, I mentioned earlier, agriculture is a state subject, but there's a lot of central government involvement in it, as we also saw in the case of this new farm laws. So that is an issue, but mostly the farmer interface is left for the state agricultural institutes and universities to manage, because they do a lot of primary and basic research on whether it's seed varieties or other inputs or other practices. So they are very directly dependent on farmers, as well as farmers depend on them, whether introducing a new seed or new every other input of fertilizer or whatever. My take on this is that, in fact, I addressed some 45 agriculture university vice chancellors a couple of years back in a vice chancellors conference. And other day also we had this pre-Vibrant Gujarat summit here. Again, I chaired a session there, which was on redesigning curriculum for better agriculture, whatever. My take is that, one, we are still too much oriented towards production activity in the farm sector. The market side of it is not paid enough attention. Not only in terms of the farmer training or student preparation or student upbringing, but also many of the government schemes also don't focus so much on market. To me, what matters most today for agriculture and farmers is markets.
Absolutely, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I believe, because
So
that's
that
where
is
the
why I
drive
say
will.
the market orientation is lacking.
Yes.
Yeah. So we need to do more of it now. Therefore, you need a different kind of professional competence to understand. Now, a lot of agriculture, no disregard to any place, but almost every agriculture university has an agri-business management course today.
Right.
Though we started IIM Ahmedabad is the first one to start it in the 1970s, and the only other IIM which has it is now Lucknow since last 20 years. But now, and we have been instrumental in helping and designing agribusiness courses of many agriculture universities and other institutions like Manage or NIAM or whatever. But today, all of the agriculture universities have agribusiness management courses. But you look at what is being delivered there, how much is management and how much is agricultural economics or just agriculture, then you can say what is lacking. Yeah, because if there are not enough people being trained in this discipline as agribusiness professionals or agribusiness instructors and teachers and professors, then how would that content be delivered? So that is the kind of issue we have. We have to move as fast as possible from a production orientation to a market orientation, because markets make things happen. Or
I think that's only one aspect, sir, which you are covering. I'd like to add to that is, like, for example, I'll give an analogy. Once I do an MBA from any institute in India, right? Then immediately after my MBA, I have corporates who are waiting for me to just join them, right? I give them a basic interview and I join them. But similar thing is lacking. There are institutes like IRMA or IIM Ahmedabad also has MBA program in agriculture. There is a college in Bhubaneswar, agricultural college in Bhubaneswar, which is producing a lot of agricultural MBAs. Even in Rajasthan, I forgot the name, under the Rajasthan University, name of the college. But there are such colleges. But the thing is, once I have done my MBA in agriculture based course, do I have a company which is big enough, which is like a corporate in an agri sector where I join? So most of the time, I feel these people end up joining big corporate firms which are producing fertilizers or high yielding variety of seeds or pesticides or companies of that sort. So, what do you feel, sir? How can this gap be bridged?
No, that's what I said. So the way these people, whether in Ahmedabad or elsewhere, the way they are being prepared and the kind of cost of education they have, most of the farmers' organization can't afford them.
Exactly, sir. This was my question to my previous speaker.
No, unless they really want to work there, or there's an alternative, or via media. A lot of our students these days are also opting for entrepreneurship by floating agri startups.
Definitely, sir. I'm also part of
one way of connecting with the farmers, that you start on a small scale, you start on an issue which is uppermost in your mind and where you can make the biggest impact. So that is one route which is happening, and a lot of these people are managing this by doing two things. One, they have not-for-profit entity, and then they have this for-profit entity.
Right,
so you get all the development support to non-profit entity, and you can do all the business through profit entity. Just let me say one more thing. The unfortunate thing is that all the agriculture universities, all the undergrad and postgrad students which are passing out from there are, I would say, completely disconnected from the farmer. They may be connected to the farm. I ask the student, whenever I go to address any agricultural campus, I ask them, can you tell me who an Indian farmer is on an average? Can you tell me what is the average land holding of a farmer in your state? They have no idea. I said, then whom are you working for? That is the ultimate stakeholder for whom you should be learning to disseminate it. If you don't even know who you are learning for, then where are you going to apply it? You may have excellent lab, you may have excellent field work in your whatever orientation of ARA, whatever it's called. But if you're not aware of who is the person or the entity you are supposed to help change or transform with your kind of learning and your work, then it's all misplaced. So that is the state of affair, that a lot of it is happening in a very big way in the labs and in the campuses and the university farms, but they are not in touch with the farmers' problems or issues by and large. That is what is the disconnect.
So then in these labs, when they do experiments or anything, then where do they get the primary data from? They have to, end of the day, go to the farmers to collect the primary data, right?
No, that's why they do that. Then based on that, you say whether this technology should be disseminated or not, and this and that. That is fine. But I'm saying, if you are not aware of the larger concerns of the sector in which you are training yourself for working, then you are missing the point somewhere.
Okay.
It's a very micro kind of thing. Then, okay, I developed this technology, is lying on the shelf for 6 years because farmers said this is not good. Because perhaps to start with, you didn't take enough farmer feedback. You didn't appreciate the farmer issues in that domain, whether it's seed or it's mechanization or any other issue of diseases, pests, and so on. Or even I don't know how many students are aware that 40% of farmer income comes from wages. I can tell you that not many students will know this. To them, farmer means who does farming and gets all his income from or her income from farming. So this is what I'm meaning, that they don't know the ground reality, that things have changed this way over the last 15, 20, 30 years. That we are still thinking of farmer means he should have land. Many of them also think that farmer should have his own land. Like Government of India thinks that us farmer means only those who have owned land. Therefore, we'll give this PM Kisan to them. They will not think of the tenant. They will not think of the sharecropper. They will not think of the farm worker. I'll give you another example from a state like Punjab. In 2015, cotton crop failed there. This last season, again, cotton crop failed there. Compensation demand came up because Punjab is also one state which has not implemented Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana to begin with. They rejected from day one, saying this is not suitable for us. Our crops never fail. Why should we pay this premium, which was about few hundred rupees per acre per season? So this time they said, okay, give us compensation. Last time, 2015, government said, okay, 8,000 per acre for farmers who had this land cultivated as owners. And what about those who were tenants or lease rate wallahs who had taken land on lease by paying 50, 60,000 rupees per acre? Nothing for them. So they were dependent on the mercy of the landowner, whether something will be given to them, because it's not the owner's crop which failed, it's the leasee's crop which failed. Then there was agriculture workers who pick cotton, and on an average, a household picks cotton out 3 acres in a season, and going rates of 5 to 6 rupees per kg. So they could have easily 8 quintal is the yield. They could have easily made 10 to 12,000 rupees per season, if not more. The government said, okay, we'll give 10% of the per acre thing, 800 rupees to this household. So 800 rupees to one household of 5 people and 8,000 rupees per acre to the farmer owner. And this government last few days back, they said we will give 17,000 to the owner and 10% of that in total, that is 1,700 to the worker household. I said, who has suffered more? Who needs more support? We don't even look at equity issues in that. Who is more precarious in his living or her living? This is how things happen in this country.
So the distribution is not equitable, is what you are
not. How is
precisely saying.
How is it? Yeah. Anyway.
So another last point probably is, sir, I studied this model from SP Jain School of SP Jain School of Management based out of Mumbai. They have 2 internships, unlike other MBA colleges. So one internship they have to do in a social sector. So something like what other agri institutes can probably also drive with more number of FPOs and FPCs coming. All these agriculture based students and UG and PG students should be mandatorily doing an internship in such an agri company, which also helps in driving what you just mentioned, right? You brought the CEO and the chief CEOs of the chief CMO of that Bhubaneswar based company. You gave them a business plan. So maybe these interns can help in building that business plan and all these management stuff. So that would be.
I don't know whether others are interested in this kind of long debate on this issue, because we may be, but anyway, I'm telling you that IRMA, where I worked earlier, which I used to think that the best field-oriented course or program they have, where as soon as the students used to join, come on campus, within 3 days, we used to take them to far-flung villages and place them within Gujarat in a household which was the poorest. They will stay there. They will eat there, whatever the household is eating, and they will go out in the morning with a lota. So this is what, if you see, if you are coming from urban background, you don't even know how they live. How would you appreciate their problems of livelihood? And now I understand that even IRMA has, and then IRMA had almost 40% total time of 22 months in the field for students. So this then main field work for 1 month in a village in their home state, or language convenience based. And then they have one internship and second internship. But I understand now they've diluted it. It's very difficult to sustain these things unless you're totally committed to it and you bring students who are completely for it. You can't take the horse and make it drink, right? The horse has to be prepared, or has to be hungry enough or thirsty enough to go to the place where you want it to go. Yeah. So these are larger questions anyway. We are living in difficult times in many ways. And things also need to change. I'm not saying we should stick around to old issues, but definitely much more is needed in terms of sensitizing those who want to work with rural people and making them appreciate the ground reality than is the case.
Mansa, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. May I now request Ms. Renu to give the vote of thanks?
Yeah. Hello, friends. It was a very, very enriching session today. Thank you, Dr. Sukhpal Singh, for throwing light on pharma producers' company and in India, its status, best practices and challenges. The way you threw light on in detail on the ownership and control of the company, women members, etc., was really, enriching for people like us who are, outside the agriculture radar. And I'm very delighted to know that, this FPCs, the way it's framed, has the ownership is with the primary producers. There are many women members. Then also the way that you described the layers within the organizations with the general framework of FPC, where there are small and marginal models, NGO model, NDTV model, then also supported by Coconut Board and, high-end models and things like that. And your, sharing of experience on performance of these companies also gives, it's thought-provoking to see where mid-course connections can be made, where what issues have to be debated, etc. And the impact that it is having, of course, it's a little bit disappointing, but better, something is better than nothing is the feeling that you get. And then for me personally, gender inclusiveness was a very, it was like what a cherry, picking cherry for me from the whole presentation. And the governance issues still, has a whole lot of issues. And according to me, I think especially the rural development work, whether it is with farmers or others, agriculture allied work, unless we align with the constitutional bodies vertically, things will not function, is my understanding and my experience. The best practices were very hard that you presented, were very, very heartening. Policies, you gave us a shock by saying no agriculture policy in our country, either in the national level and state level. Yes, this agriculture has to be, for a country like India, agriculture has to be mainstream debate, mainstream discussion, but it is like, people like us sitting somewhere and it's like an offbeat discussion, as though we are talking of art or culture or things like that, where everybody should be discussing about agriculture in the mainstream, and it should be in everybody's knowledge and consciousness. But that is not there, which is very sad. However, a small group of us are very inspired and enlightened by whatever you said. I also thank you so much, Dr. Sukhpal Singh, for that. A lot to learn from you. I also thank Suresh, who threw light on common delivery platform. And I mean, we have seen this earlier, but yes, some more, some more understanding of that presentation, of that in that particular slide. Personally speaking, again, I didn't see anything tangible in that. What is it that, at the end of it, information, awareness is all fine. But then what? Tangibly, I mean, what is tangible at the end of it is something that we'll have to work a little more on, is what I feel. My sincere thanks to all the participants who sat through this for 2 hours nearly now, and all those who participated in the discussions. Thank you, Manasa, for facilitating and hosting this session. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Jagdish sir also wants to convey his thanks to Dr. Sukhpal Singh for your wonderful presentation. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jagdish ji. Pleasure. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Renuji.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Suresh. Thanks a lot.